Welcome in to CBS News 24/7. I'm Elizabeth Cook. Let's take a live look inside the White House right now, where Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt expected to step up to the podium shortly and give an update right there. And we're also looking out for how Leavitt will respond to these key issues today, including the bombshell report accusing Pete Hegseth of sharing war plans on a second Signal chat. The latest on the legal battles over deportations. We're also going to be watching for that. And the announcement on student loan debt collection impacting millions of people today. But first, a live look at Vatican City, where Catholics are gathering to pay their respects to the late Pope Francis. Public viewings begin tomorrow at St. Peter's Basilica, ahead of the Pope's funeral Saturday at St. Peter's Square. That ceremony expected to draw leaders from around the world, including President Donald Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Now, the Vatican released these first photos and a video of Pope Francis in a coffin in the chapel of his Santa Marta residence there. The Pope's death certificate listed his cause of death as a stroke that put him into a coma that eventually led to heart failure. And next month, the Sistine Chapel will be the venue for the secretive election process to choose the next pope. Cardinals from around the world will gather here for centuries-old tradition, also known as the Papal Conclave. Let's bring in CBS News senior foreign correspondent Seth Doane. He is live from Rome for us. Seth, what more can you tell us about how the Vatican will mourn Pope Francis over the next few days?
Well, there is quite a series of events, Liz, as you pointed out. Those pictures were released today of an earlier viewing that was for Vatican insiders, for family members of Francis, and also for clergy to pay their respects. Then the public will get their opportunity to do so starting tomorrow. His body will be brought to St. Peter's Basilica in a procession to St. Peter's Basilica, which is right behind me. He will then lie in state there in that coffin until the funeral, which is going to be Saturday morning at 10 o'clock. On Friday evening, they'll put a veil over his face. They'll close the coffin. Inside the coffin go some coins dated from when he was Pope, from during his papacy, and also some of the documents, a little story of his papacy. That's part of this great tradition that we're seeing unfold. But interestingly, Pope Francis, as you know, as he lived his life, as he pushed others to live their lives, he focused on simplicity. And we're seeing that even in how he's being honored in his passing here. He's chosen to, for instance, not be in these three nesting coffins. Popes were always put in three nesting coffins. He will be in one zinc-lined coffin. And there are various ways where for the pageantry that we're seeing, it is scaled down for a pope.
And Seth, mourners have already been pouring into Vatican City to pay their respects to Pope Francis. What are we hearing from people?
We've spent a lot of time in St. Peter's Square, which is just behind me in front of the church, which is really where, of course, pilgrims are coming. This is the middle of the Jubilee year, where Catholics are encouraged to come to Rome to pray, to walk through the Holy Door. Of course, it has even more significance now with the passing of the Pope. And what strikes me being down there with mourners is just how global this church is. You know, we so often see things through an American lens because that's our lens. But you're really surrounded by people from India, from Africa. I spoke with a Franciscan friar from Lebanon last night, and you realize how global he was as a leader, how global the church is as an institution, and the outpouring of support and love for him is clearly there. I wasn't seeing the kind of tears, the outpouring of sorrow that you kind of might have expected to see, but there's more of a kind of a tranquility, a peace, a reflective nature to the people who are coming and realize they're in Rome and witnessing history, really.
And so many are celebrating the legacy that he leaves behind. You know, looking forward to Conclave, it's very interesting to talk about sort of the ceremony and tradition that cloaks this very important ceremony for the Catholic Church. I'm curious if you're hearing any rumblings of front runners or any nations or countries that they're hoping to bring into possibly candidacy for the papacy.
Well, as they say, the cardinals who go into the conclave as a pope come out as a cardinal, meaning those who are seen to be campaigning or thought to be the front runners often wind up not to be that. Of course, there are a number of front runners who are mentioned, some from different parts of the world. From Africa, there are two cardinals in the Philippines who are mentioned, still a number of Italians. Cardinal Pietro Parolin is the number 2 currently, the Vatican Secretary of State, a close ally and a real diplomat of Pope Francis, but it's really too early to know. What is happening now, the cardinals have started, this is day 1 of these general congregation meetings, and cardinals are getting together and they're deciding a number of things. One, today they set the date of the funeral. We know it's Saturday at 10 a.m. Rome time. We expect to know the date that the conclave will begin probably by the end of the week. That's another thing that they'll be discussing. But after this the funeral on Saturday starts 9 days of official mourning. So there will certainly be no conclave starting before the end of that. So we're probably looking for the conclave to begin somewhere in that week of May 5th, 6th, 7th, something like that would be the best guess. But the cardinals will release that information when they decide they're ready to release it.
Yes, and it will be fascinating for all of us to watch. Seth Doan live for us in Rome. Thank you so much, Seth. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is coming under fire again for reportedly revealing sensitive military information on yet another group chat, this time involving members of his own family. Sources tell CBS News Hegseth shared details of last month's U.S. attack on Yemen. Hegseth is firing back, though, blaming leaks in the Pentagon. Okay, let's bring in CBS News senior national security correspondent Charlie D'Agata. He's joining us now from the Pentagon. Charlie, we've heard his defense. Yesterday, he was blaming the media. Today, it's the leakers. Is this controversy likely to go away for Hegseth?
Liz, the short answer is no, at least not yet. You know, we're talking about it again today, and we will be talking about it in the days to come. As the defense secretary intimated there, he's shifting the focus not on the conversations that took place on Signal, now to conversations that took place. Certainly no denial, but putting blame on those alleged leakers. And there are growing calls, and we've heard them, certainly within the Democratic Party, that he should resign or be fired with this latest development that broke over the weekend, that he shared at least what most would consider sensitive, if not classified information with his wife, his brother, and his lawyer, and the criticism that those individuals would not have had security clearance about an ongoing military operation against the Houthis. And that information put pilots at risk. The defense secretary's ever-shrinking team is circling the wagons. His chief spokesman, Sean Parnell, posting on X, called it another story brought back from the dead, saying there was no classified information in any Signal chat, no matter how many times they try to write the story. So former DOD spokesman John Elliott describes absolute chaos here at the Pentagon, full-blown meltdown of infighting, saying Hegseth should stand down.
What can you tell us about those Pentagon officials that he talked about that have been placed on administrative leave and this ongoing leak investigation? Is there any evidence to point to that?
They say there hasn't been any evidence that's been given to them, that's been provided to them. The 3 individuals are part of Hegseth's group, senior advisors. Dan Caldwell, who advised the defense secretary, sat in on foreign meetings, foreign visitors here, and other foreign trips. Another advisor, Darren Selnick, who also provided advice kind of in particular on DEI initiatives that we've discussed in the past in programs. And the last one is Colin Carroll, chief of staff to the deputy defense secretary. So, I mean, we're talking about Hegseth's inner circle, and it's a small inner circle. It's also worth pointing out that they were Hegseth approved, as it were. They weren't here before the defense secretary started here at the Pentagon. In fact, Caldwell, in particular, had worked with Hegseth before. Either one of them held a job here. So in a joint statement, they said, we haven't been given any evidence for exactly why we're investigated, or if even there's a real investigation of leaks to begin with. So this is ongoing. As Secretary Hegseth said today, this investigation will continue about the alleged leakers, but the Signal chat in itself and whether or not that put pilots' lives at risk is going to continue in the days and weeks to come.
Charlie D'Agata live for us at the Pentagon. Thanks so much, Charlie. Well, big announcement for millions of Americans with student debt. The Education Department says in about 2 weeks, it will start collecting payments for student loans in default. And according to the department, more than 5 million borrowers are in default. That could mean wage garnishment or money withheld from tax refunds and even Social Security benefits. On CBS Morning, CBS News business analyst Jill Schlesinger says those borrowers need to pay attention.
All of the people in default, we are now seeing reporting to credit agencies. We haven't seen that before. Wow. So we now know that credit scores are dropping for these borrowers by somewhere around 130 points.
Wow. Well, the Education Department says less than 40% of borrowers are current on their student loan payments. Now inside the White House, where Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt expected to give an update to reporters very shortly. But let's bring in CBS News White House reporter Aaron Navarro. He's joining us live at the White House. As we wait for that press briefing to begin, Aaron, I want to ask you what President Trump today is saying about his embattled defense secretary.
Well, it's good to be with you. While we will hear potentially from Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt in the coming minutes, potentially responding to that story, what we've heard from President Trump so far, from the White House staff, from allies of the president, is backing up Hegseth, really digging in their heels, saying that they have confidence in him as Secretary of Defense. President Trump yesterday at the Easter egg roll event here at the White House really downplayed the story, saying it's, quote, a waste of time, said to reporters to ask the Houthis, of course, referencing the strikes on Yemen that are at the core of this whole Signal Gate story. And that's what we've been hearing privately from allies of the White House, those inside the White House, really just confidence behind Hegseth, downplaying this story, and a rejection that there are any immediate conversations to look for a replacement for the Secretary of Defense.
You know, another big topic expected to be addressed today at the press briefing. President Trump having a call today with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. What can you tell us about that conversation?
Yeah, President Trump posted on Truth Social saying that they discussed numerous topics, including trade and Iran. Trade being notable just given that Prime Minister Netanyahu was one of the first world leaders to visit the White House after President Trump announced his, quote, reciprocal tariffs back in April. Israel, interestingly, had dropped their own taxes on U.S. goods, but the U.S. still had a 10% reciprocal tariff on Israel. Curious to see if that has been resolved at all as the administration looks to work through trade negotiations with countries during this 90-day pause. And Iran, that's notable to me as well, especially as talks are expected to be underway this weekend between U.S. and Iranian officials. President Trump's goal of curbing any development of nuclear weapons in Iran.
And Aaron, before you go, I want to talk about the latest in this battle between the Trump administration and one of America's top universities, Harvard. Harvard now suing the Trump administration. What's the latest on that?
Yeah, just some context. President Trump's administration froze about $2.2 billion worth of funding to Harvard, put a threat of $1 billion more potentially, as they are asking the university, the country's oldest university, to do several concessions, audits of their programs, screening international students for their beliefs, and installing administrations at Harvard picked by the Trump administration to ensure that the White House's asks are met. Harvard filed a lawsuit this week claiming violations of the university's First Amendment, violations of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which prohibits funding being impacted by discrimination based on race or country of origin. And in the statement we got from the White House responding to this lawsuit, the White House says, quote, the gravy train of federal assistance to institutions like Harvard is coming to an end.
Aaron Navarro, thank you so much for the update there from the White House. We're going to keep an eye on that press briefing and bring you back a little bit later in this show. All right, a woman and her grandchildren just steps away from disaster. It's all caught on video right there. Their narrow escape on a New York sidewalk. Stay with us right here on CBS News 24/7. Well, this might be the definition of a close call. The Poughkeepsie Fire Department shared this video. Look at that. Of a woman and two grandchildren narrowly escaping a manhole explosion. This happened on Saturday, seconds after they walked over the sidewalk. A manhole, as you saw there, just exploded. Luckily, they got away just in time and managed to avoid any injury. Fire crews say at least 3 manholes exploded in that area the same day. No word yet on exactly why it happened, but the fire department says companies found high levels of carbon monoxide inside multiple buildings there. And a highway in northern Indiana reopened today after a semi-truck exploded into a ball of flames. The fire broke out yesterday, shutting down I-65 in the town of DeMotte, about 60 miles outside of Chicago. Police say the truck had a mechanical failure and was hauling flammable material when it caught fire. Luckily, that driver not injured. Yeah, yet another town hall looked like this. This is a scene inside a town hall hosted by Florida Republican Congressman Byron Donalds. You can hear audience members there booing the 3-term congressman while asking questions about DOGE cuts, immigration, and gun control. At least 2 people were removed from the event, and this marks just the latest town hall to be dominated by protests against the Trump administration. Well, we are tracking multiple stories today in the Trump administration's efforts to crack down on immigration. First, the wife of detained Columbia University activist Mahmoud Khalil gave birth to their son without Mahmoud present. She accused federal officials of deliberately shutting down her request to have Mahmoud there. In a statement, she said, in part, despite our request for ICE to allow Mahmoud to attend the birth, they denied his temporary release to meet our son. This was purposeful decision by ICE to make me, Mahmoud, and our son suffer. Meanwhile, a group of House Democrats traveled to El Salvador on Monday, and they are seeking the release of this man, this deported Maryland father, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, but were denied a meeting with him. Now they are calling for daily proof of life. So let's bring in CBS News immigration correspondent Camilo Montoya Galvez, who is following this story and so much more. Camilo, always great to be with you. What does daily proof of life mean here, and why are Democrats demanding it?
Well, Liz, the simple answer is that the Justice Department and the Trump administration writ large had been providing scant details about the status and the whereabouts of Mr. Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the man that officials conceded was deported by mistake because of an administrative error, according to testimony from Justice Department officials, to El Salvador back in March. We only learned that Mr. Abrego Garcia had been transferred from that notorious maximum security prison known as Secot a couple of days ago because Senator Van Hollen of Maryland was able to talk to officials down there and also to Mr. Abrego Garcia and confirm that transfer, that he is now in the custody of another detention facility also in El Salvador. And we should also know that even though the administration is under this binding legal court order to quote unquote facilitate the return of this man who was living in Maryland with his U.S. citizen wife and son, they are arguing now that they are powerless in this situation because Mr. Abrego Garcia is still in Salvadorian custody. And they have also now argued that even if it was possible to bring him back to the U.S., it is not in the public's interest to do so. One, because they still argue, Liz, that he is a known gang member. Two, because they argue that he is not a sympathetic figure, citing that domestic violence case from 2021. And three, because they say he would still be deported anyhow if he comes back to the U.S.
You know, there's lots of different storylines going on here, Camilo, when it comes to Trump's efforts for mass deportation. What's the latest movement with deportations under Trump's use of the Alien Enemies Act?
Well, over the weekend, the Supreme Court, Liz, blocked the Trump administration from using this 18th century wartime law known as the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 to deport a group of Venezuelan men detained in northern Texas. And the Supreme Court granted a request from the ACLU to do that because the ACLU list had argued in federal court that these men had only been given 12 hours or a day to contest their deportation under the Alien Enemies Act, despite the Supreme Court saying earlier in April that the administration could use this authority to deport individuals associated with the notorious Tren de Aragua gang as long as they provided reasonable time for these detainees to contest their deportation. The ACLU list is now arguing that what the administration did not afford these detainees sufficient and reasonable time to contest their detention and potential deportation under this wartime authority. So this will not be the final say in this case, and we should expect the Supreme Court to rule on another request by the Justice Department to lift this block, and also ultimately to rule on the merits and the legality of this measure by the administration.
Okay, so there's the Alien Enemies Act, and now there's something called the RICO law, and the U.S. is invoking it and charging more alleged Venezuelan gang members. What is the RICO law, and what went into this decision?
Well, Tren de Aragua, the Venezuelan prison gang, has been a focal point, Liz, as you know, of the Trump administration's crackdown on illegal immigration. It was designated a foreign terrorist organization by the administration several weeks ago, and the administration has promised to eradicate it from U.S. soil, including by deporting alleged members of that group to places like El Salvador, which we just spoke about, Liz, but also to Venezuela, their home country. But now the Justice Department is undertaking a pretty novel and unprecedented use of this RICO statute, which traditionally and historically has been used to dismantle the mafia and organized crime, to also go after Tren de Aragua. And they have charged more than 24 alleged members of Tren de Aragua with crimes ranging from illegal weapons use and possession to sex trafficking and also robbery, using this statute that again was historically meant to dismantle the mafia. So this is yet another step by the administration to go after these gangs. But the open question, of course, Liz, is whether or not they can prove in court that these are all indeed gang members, because as we have seen, many of the men who have been deported to Socot, to that notorious prison, have contested that accusation that they are gang members.
All right, CBS News immigration correspondent Camilo Montoyo Galvez. Thank you so much, Camilo. Great to see you. All right, let's take a live look now at Chicago, where there's a chance of thunderstorms today in parts of the Midwest. That system stirring up some gusty winds and possibly bringing even hail. I want to bring in Jess to talk more about this system, this spring system, that we're kind of this unsettled system that happens a lot during spring, right?
Well, it's not only thunderstorm activity that we're really concerned about too throughout Chicago, stretched all the way across the Central Plains. We're also gearing up for well above average weather too, temperature-wise at least. Daytime highs today, it doesn't matter where you live in the states. I mean, we're talking about New York City, stretched all the way over into Chicago, which I'm about to show you in a second, and making our way all the way down to the south. We're above average for this time of year. Chicago today topping off at 70 degrees before we see thunderstorm activity right around the corner, and it's going to be noticeable widespread throughout all these states. But another thing to mention too, this heat really impacts states like Florida, over into Texas, and all the way off into the West Coast too. I mean, Phoenix this afternoon topping off at 92 degrees. So let's head back over to Chicago real fast and talk a little bit about what the weather's going to look like for us. We're not only gearing up for these warm conditions, not only today and tomorrow, but we're also gearing up for a series of showers and thunderstorm activities that will sweep anywhere from Alabama all the way up into the Great Lakes within the coming days. We're 20 degrees above average today over into Boston. We're about 2 degrees above average on the West Coast, closer to San Francisco. Heading into the next 6 to 10 days, that heat's really going to stay centralized over the south, but making its way off into the East Coast too. And at the same time, let's talk about those thunderstorms that we're gearing up for into this afternoon and evening hours tonight. It stretches from Texas all the way across the plains up into areas like Chicago. We're gearing up for some light to moderate showers, a chance of thunderstorm activity up there into the evening hours tonight. Thursday, we're getting a repeat of that with a lot of unsettled weather. Basically, heat rises, and it's a warm setup for us widespread throughout these communities. So we're dealing with an unstable atmosphere all throughout these communities. That's why when you take a look at our severe weather outlook, it stretches from Louisiana off into the Carolinas, from Texas all the way up into the Great Lakes today and tomorrow. We're going to see a chance for large hail in all these communities too, and anywhere up to around 2 to even 3 inches of rain, which could cause some localized flooding as well.
All right, Jess, thanks so much.
Of course.
All right, White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt just stepped up to the podium to give an update and answer some questions from the media. We're going to look at that and bring you the highlights when we come back. You're watching CBS News 24/7. Welcome back to CBS News 24/7. Let's take you to Florida now, where a large fire at a salvage yard is Thankfully, now under control after dozens of fire units spent hours battling these flames. This happening in Riverview, which is a city just outside of Tampa. Firefighters were called to the auto salvage yard just before 3 a.m. That fire quickly upgraded to a 3-alarm, burning in an area where hundreds of salvaged cars are stacked on top of each other. Fire crews are expected to be out there all day, dousing any hot spots and then watching for flare-ups. Luckily, no injuries have been reported in this one. And we are following Secretary of State Marco Rubio's moves today. Just before meeting with the Prime Minister of Qatar earlier today, Rubio announced a proposed plan to streamline the State Department headquarters in D.C. So let's bring in CBS News correspondent Chanel Call. She's been following this story from us from our newsroom. Chanel, what do we know about this?
So the State Department held a press briefing. It just wrapped up about 30 minutes ago, officially announcing what it's calling a reorganizational roadmap. State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce called the agency bloated and said these sweeping changes will, quote, empower diplomats to put Americans first. Listen.
This is a reorganization plan. It is not something where people are being fired today. They're not, no one's going to be walking out of the building. It's not that kind of a dynamic. It is a roadmap. It's a plan. It is something that there's been a congressional notice that has been sent. And so the steps and the procedures that happen through the government are also taking place at this point as well.
All right, in terms of what here is going to be impacted, an organizational chart released to the public today shows that the agency will essentially eliminate several human rights-focused programs, programs that are focused on war crimes and democracy. On the chopping block, the Office of Global Women's Issues, the Diversity and Inclusion Office, and the Foreign Service Institute we know will also be impacted. This, by the way, provides language training and support for career foreign service officers. The plan would also notably create some new offices, including a new Assistant Secretary for Emerging Threats. In a social media post, Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, said, quote, the region-specific functions would be consolidated to increase functionality, redundant offices will be removed, and non-statutory programs that are misaligned with America's core national interests will cease to exist. Should also note that when it comes to these closures, Bruce had said in that press conference that employees that are impacted will be able to soon apply to other jobs within the State Department.
All right, CBS News correspondent Chanel Call, thanks so much for that update. All right, we got to talk about Wall Street. Taking a live look at the big board now. The Dow rebounding today after steep declines following President Trump's online attacks against Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell. The president called him, quote, a major loser yesterday for not lowering interest rates. The markets, meanwhile, reacting negatively with all three major indices falling about 2.5% yesterday. The Dow is actually headed for its worst April since 1932 during the Great Depression. Let's bring in CBS News Money Watch correspondent Kelly O'Grady. Kelly, there's a lot of escalating tension between the president and the Fed chair. Can you talk about why the Federal Reserve's independence is so critical at this point?
So one of the reasons is to keep inflation in check. So traditionally, the Federal Reserve has two mandates. It's to keep prices stable and to keep inflation at that 2% target that we talk a lot about, but also on the other hand, to keep the labor market at full employment and to ensure that economic growth is relatively stable and strong. Now, when you have a government, whether it be the White House or any other government, with influence on the central bank or control over the central bank, in this case, the Federal Reserve, there's concern that they would influence interest rates and that would essentially become a political tool because it could be a very good political motivator for voters if a presidential candidate were to say, well, we're going to bring interest rates down to zero. And that would impact mortgage rates and small business loans and auto loans and all sorts of things like that, essentially the borrowing cost of money. So we traditionally want those things to be separate because we want the Federal Reserve or a central bank to be able to utilize interest rates to fulfill their dual mandates rather than take influence or rather take a suggestion from the White House or the president in this case.
Also happening today in relation to the markets and really the global economy, the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, says they see global economic growth as been hurt by the Trump tariffs. What else can you tell us about this report?
So it's not entirely surprising. We've seen a number of agencies, including the World Trade Organization, a number of banks, sort of scale back their focus, their expectations for economic growth. This specifically took U.S. economic growth for 2025 down from 2.7% to 1.8%. So that is a full percentage point drop in terms of where the IMF sees the U.S. economy growing in 2025. And they also highlighted that inflation, whether it be in the U.S. or the U.K. or some of these other European countries, is expected to rise. The number that they pegged for the expectation for the U.S. by the end of 2025 is 3%. That's significantly further away than we are right now from that 2% target that the Fed has. They also highlighted, going back to your original question, that independence of the central bank, they didn't single out the U.S., but said central banks in general, is critical for economic growth and for inflation to remain stable. So that does seem to be a nod towards what's happening here in the U.S. right now.
Yeah, I want to ask you, too, about the ongoing U.S.-China trade war. CBS News confirmed that Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is signaling that we could soon see some de-escalation on this front. What are our sources telling you?
Yeah, so this is some breaking news, and a hat tip to my colleague Richard Escobedo for this. So Bessent is saying, this was at a closed-door summit with investors, it was hosted by J.P. Morgan Chase, that the tariff standoff with China is unsustainable and that he expects the situation to de-escalate. And in fact, when this news broke earlier, you actually saw the markets sort of take a nice little turn upward. We do seem to be paring back some of those gains. The Dow was above 1,000 at one point. But Bessent also said that negotiations with China have not started, but a deal is possible. So there does seem to be optimism. But Liz, I checked in with a number of investors that I speak with regularly, and they said, yeah, we're optimistic, but there doesn't seem to be a timeline for these negotiations. So there's also a little bit of skepticism there.
All right, we'll keep watching on that. All right, Kelly O'Grady, thanks so much. All right, the White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt talking trade with China. We're going to play back some of what she has to say. Stay with us right here on CBS News 24/7. All right, let's take a live look at St. Peter's Square in Vatican City, where people have been gathering to remember Pope Francis. Doctors at the Vatican confirmed the Pope died yesterday after having a stroke that put him into a coma, and that led to heart failure. The late Pope will lie in state starting tomorrow until his funeral on Saturday. CBS News senior correspondent Nora O'Donnell reports from Vatican City on what we can expect this week.
Good afternoon from here in Rome. The Holy See today announced new details about the funeral mass for Pope Francis, which will be held in the square behind me on Saturday at 10 a.m. with heads of state, including President Trump, from all over the world will be gathered here. In fact, there are thousands already in Rome. I've been here 3 times in the past year. I've never seen so many people. It was just about a year ago that we sat down with Pope Francis for that historic interview, and he talked about his legacy. He said he hopes the church will be his legacy. Certainly his papacy has been marked by inclusiveness and compassion and outreach to the people. As for now, we are learning that the Pope will lie in state in St. Peter's Basilica starting tomorrow, and so you can expect this to be very crowded here at the Vatican as people come from all over the world to say goodbye. I'm Nora O'Donnell for CBS News in Rome.
And that will be remarkable to watch. Meanwhile, mourners around the United States have been laying out tributes and offering prayers for Pope Francis. The late pontiff is known for encouraging unity within the church and beyond, and advising the faithful to listen to each other. CBS News correspondent Janet Shamlian takes us to Houston, where one of the fastest growing dioceses in the U.S. is bringing people together from sharply different backgrounds.
The church bells rang in downtown Houston as Catholics, with hearts both heavy and grateful, came for comfort. At the Co-Cathedral of the Sacred Heart, parishioners mourned a pope they never met, but always felt close to.
I am here to commemorate our Pope's wonderful life. He has been a changer in the Catholic Church.
June Barth is a lifelong Catholic.
How has he changed the church? He has gone away from all the conservative ways, and he's more of a people person. He's reached out to the poor, the handicapped, the lonely.
More than 7 million Catholics live in Texas. The Houston-Galveston Diocese is the nation's 5th largest and arguably its most diverse. Mass is offered in 14 languages.
How do you comfort such a diverse population?
With the gospel. And so we just, this last 4 days, celebrated in 3 languages in this building that I was present with, just in this community alone.
On the day of his death, many of the faithful are considering his life, one marked by his unshakable commitment to humility and inclusion, values that mirror their own.
Did you feel a connection to him personally?
Pope Francis, he took that name for a reason, to help the poor, to be with the children, and I think that touched me. He would lead a very humble life.
1 in 5 American adults describe themselves as Catholic, some 53 million people. A strong majority, 78%, viewed Pope Francis favorably.
So you stood behind the doctrines he supported?
Not 100%, but at the end of the day, he is the Pope.
One of those stances that made him a polarizing figure, especially here in Texas, immigration.
We're an immigrant country, and we should realize that everybody is our brother and our sister.
Tonight in churches like this, where belief is expressed in multiple languages, the loss of a pope is a death in the family.
We pray for the repose of the soul of our Holy Father, Pope Francis.
And the sorrow, like the faith, runs deep. For Eye on America, I'm Janet Shamlian in Houston.
Thank you, Janet, for that. All right, live look at the White House. A press briefing with Karoline Leavitt just wrapped up. She talked about trade with China and the independence of the Federal Reserve. Aaron Navarro joins us after the break to break down this press conference. You're watching CBS News 24/7. All right, another live look now at the White House, where Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt just wrapped up a briefing there. CBS News White House reporter Aaron Navarro was listening into all of that. Aaron, we heard Karoline Leavitt mention the trade war between China and the U.S., and our CBS News Confirmed team reported that tensions between the two countries could be de-escalating. What did she say about it?
Yeah, well, what we've heard from Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt largely is that there are more proposals on paper from other countries, 18 in total, for potential trade deals with the U.S. Said that the U.S. economic officials are going to be meeting with 34 countries this week. But of course, China remains a crucial part, not just to our economy, but the general reciprocal, quote unquote, tariff that President Trump instituted in April. Take a listen to what Secretary Leavitt said when asked about where things stand between the U.S. and China in terms of a trade deal.
Do have something to share on that. I asked the president about this before coming out here, and he wanted me to share with all of you that we're doing very well in respect to a potential trade deal with China. As I mentioned, there have now been 18 proposals in more than 100 countries around the world who are wanting to make a deal with the United States of America, and the president and the administration are setting the stage for a deal with China. So we feel everyone involved wants to see a trade deal happen, and the ball is moving in the right direction. Sure.
Setting the stage for a deal with China, what does that mean? Has the president spoken directly with Xi yet?
I don't have anything to read out on a direct talk between the president and President Xi, but we will continue to keep you updated.
And Secretary Bessent reportedly today told investors that the trade standoff with China he expects will be de-escalating soon because, as he described it, reportedly the situation is unsustainable. Is the president considering taking steps to de-escalate the situation with China?
Again, I just read you words directly from the President of the United States. Those are moments ago. That's where his head is at right now.
So you heard Secretary Leavitt not necessarily adding much to that story in regards to Bessent, but our colleague Richard Escobedo heard from a source in the room where the Treasury Secretary was speaking to investors in a summit in D.C. That Bessent shared that the negotiations with China just have not started yet. They still voiced optimism a deal is possible, but at this moment, no movement currently, while Bessent also shared, as you heard in that clip, concerns that the standoff between the U.S. and China in regards to trade is, quote, unsustainable.
Yeah, and Aaron, we understand that Karoline Leavitt also commented on the ongoing tension between Trump and Fed Chairman Jerome Powell. What did she say?
Yeah, just some context there. On April 17, President Trump said that Fed Chair Jerome Powell's termination, quote, cannot come fast enough. We also heard from National Economic Council Director Kevin Hegseth, who said the Trump administration is looking into whether firing Jerome Powell is an option. Take a listen to what she said about the president and his feelings towards the Fed chair.
The president has made his position on the Fed and on Powell quite clear. The president believes that they have been making moves and taking action in the name of politics rather in the name of what's right for the American economy. The president has the right to express his displeasure with the Fed, and he has the right to say he believes interest rates should be lower. He believes Americans should be able to borrow money cheaper than they currently are right now. And I also spoke to Kevin Hegseth about the Fed as well, and he has called into question the Fed's independence and whether they are actually doing things, again, out of the best interest of the economy, or are they doing it for partisan reasons. The president wants to see interest rates lower. He has made that quite clear.
Now, it's been a steady drumbeat in recent days from President Trump calling for Jerome Powell to lower the interest rates. You heard him say that yesterday on the post on Truth Social. Legally, the Supreme Court decision said that board members of independent federal agencies, such as the Federal Reserve, can only be forced out before their terms expire, quote, for cause. Powell's term expires around 2028. So certainly that's why you're hearing the White House saying they're looking into it, but not necessarily saying that they will act on it right away.
May not be possible. All right, Aaron Navarro, thank you so much for that. All right, let's talk about the weather going on around the country. Let's take a live look at Miami, where it's starting to feel a lot like summer. Temperatures shooting up, not just there, but on both coasts. I want to bring in Jessica Birch to talk more about this trend that's happening not only in Miami, but also on the West Coast, right?
Everywhere. I mean, across the board right now, we're seeing more of a summer-like pattern for us. So we're going to dive over into the map real fast just to show you what's happening for us. Heading outside today, tomorrow, and into the next couple days, you're going to notice above average weather anywhere from New Orleans over into Tampa. Miami, you saw that live look. It is hot out there, and we continue to see above average temperatures anywhere from Boston all the way into New York City. This is the same trend on the West Coast. Get a look behind me real fast. This puts us about 20 degrees above average in certain communities, like Boston, for example, about 15 degrees above average today over into New York. You head over into the West Coast, it's looking very similar. And that's going to be the case as we head into the next 6 to 10 days, at least for the south and off into the Northeast, while our friends on the West Coast catch a nice needed break. We're going to see some thunderstorm activity anywhere from Texas across the Central Plains as we head into the coming days. We're going to keep a close eye on that. We can expect anywhere up to around 2 inches of rain heading into our Thursday and Friday forecast throughout these communities, and a chance of thunderstorm activity means hail is possible in these areas too, Liz.
All right, everything's happening across the country right
busy.
now. We got
Busy
heat,
and
we got hail, we got all of it.
Yep.
Thanks, Jess.
Of course.
All right, we'll have much more straight ahead here on CBS News 24/7. And as I take you to break, I want to take you back to the Vatican, where we're going to go to St. Peter's Square, where they are doing a rosary that is happening in Rome right now to honor the late Pope Francis. His funeral will be on Saturday, and we will bring you all the events leading up to his funeral, and then the days of mourning following that ceremony, and then, of course, conclave happening in the weeks after his funeral, and then his the days of mourning there. But a lot going on today, not only in Europe, but also here in the United States. We're keeping an eye on the Dow, and just the press secretary, Karoline Leavitt, wrapping up a press conference talking about possible de-escalating tensions between China and the U.S. We're going to cover all of it coming up right here on CBS News 24/7. Lindsay Reiser joining us next.